An Apache woman was left to die in the desert. A rancher saved her and did the unthinkable. The sun was already high in the sky, burning fiercely over the endless stretch of Arizona desert. The air shimmered with heat, and the sand radiated waves of warmth, making the landscape appear to ripple like water. The desert, beautiful in its wide openness, was also merciless. Every step could mean the difference between life and death for those who wandered too far without water or shelter. Among the towering cacti and dry scrub, one figure moved slowly, her body trembling with exhaustion and pain. She was an Apache woman named Nayeli, and she was alone. Nayeli had been traveling for days, separated from her people during a raid that had gone terribly wrong. She had been running through the rocky canyons and open plains, trying to escape dangers she barely understood. Her small frame, once strong and full of energy, now sagged under the weight of fatigue and injury. Cuts and bruises marked her arms and legs from her journey through the desert, and her clothes were torn, sun-bleached, and dusty. With every step she stumbled, fighting against dizziness and the gnawing hunger that made her stomach ache. Her mind kept replaying the events that had led her here. The attack had been sudden, leaving chaos in its wake. She had seen others taken or lost, and though she had tried to help, there had been nothing she could do. The desert had seemed an impossible place to survive, but she had no choice. Her instinct for life pushed her forward, step by step, even when her body wanted to give up. The sun grew hotter and the heat pressed down on her like a heavy blanket. Each breath felt like inhaling fire, and the sharp wind that blew across the dunes stung her cracked lips. She found herself walking in circles at times, disoriented by the endless sameness of the desert. The rocks and cacti all looked alike, and without landmarks she could not tell if she was moving closer to safety or deeper into danger. As she paused to rest under the scant shade of a small cactus, Nayeli's thoughts drifted to her family and her people. The memory of their faces brought both comfort and sorrow. She thought of the elders who had taught her how to survive in the wild, how to find water and read the signs of nature. She remembered the laughter of children running through the village, the quiet songs sung at night, and the smells of cooking fires. All of it seemed so far away now, like a dream she could almost reach but never quite touch. Tears stung her eyes, but she did not allow herself to cry. Crying, she knew, would waste energy she could not afford to lose. Time passed slowly in the desert. The sun began to tilt toward the west, casting long shadows that stretched over the sand like dark fingers. Nayeli stumbled on, feeling the weight of every step. Her throat was dry and she had no water to drink. Her body was trembling from dehydration, and her vision blurred from fatigue. At one point she collapsed onto the sand, unable to go any further. Her hands dug into the earth, and she pressed her face to the ground, listening to the faint whispers of the wind as it moved through the rocks and cacti. It was then that she heard a faint sound in the distance. The low mooing of cattle carried on the dry air. Her heart skipped a beat. For days she had seen nothing but empty desert, and the sound was a sign that she might not be completely alone. Mustering every ounce of strength, she pushed herself up and began to move toward the sound, hoping it might lead to water, shelter, or help. The source of the sound soon became clear. A small ranch appeared on the horizon, surrounded by dry fences and dotted with cattle grazing in the sparse grass. It was a modest homestead, but to Nayeli it was a symbol of life in the barren desert. She staggered toward it, every step an effort, praying that someone there would help her. Her legs shook violently, and her breath came in shallow gasps, but she refused to give up. On the ranch, Samuel Hayes, a tall man with weathered skin and eyes that had seen many harsh desert years, was busy checking on his herd. He had lived in this desert for decades, understanding its dangers and learning how to survive where others could not. The ranch was his life, built through hard work and countless challenges. As he moved among the cattle, he noticed a figure far off in the distance. At first he thought it might be one of his ranch hands or a traveler passing by. But as she drew closer, he saw her frail state and recognized immediately that she was in grave danger. Samuel hurried to meet her, calling out to see if she could hear him. Naeli, her ears attuned to every sound in the desert, heard his voice and weakly responded, though she could barely speak. The rancher reached her just as she was about to collapse completely, supporting her trembling body and helping her sit down in the shade of a small wooden fence. She could barely lift her head, and the sun had burned her skin a deep red. Samuel looked at her carefully, noticing the cuts on her arms and legs, the sunburn, and the exhaustion that weighed down her every movement. It was clear that she had been alone in the desert for far too long. Despite the historical tensions between settlers and the Apache people, something in Samuel stirred, a deep human instinct to help someone in need. He knew that without immediate care, she would not survive the night. He helped her to the ranch house, carrying her the last few hundred yards, his strong arms keeping her upright. Inside, he gave her water and small pieces of bread, urging her to drink slowly. She accepted with a quiet nod, her lips dry and cracked, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and relief. Samuel gently cleaned the wounds on her arms and legs, applying ointments he had prepared for the cattle but which would serve for minor injuries. Every movement he made was careful so as not to frighten her. Naeli's body began to relax for the first time in days. The fear of dying alone in the desert slowly gave way to a fragile hope. She watched Samuel move around the small room, marveling at how much effort he was putting into helping her, without asking anything in return. Though she could not yet speak his language fully, the gesture was clear. He wanted to save her. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the desert cooled slightly, Naeli finally allowed herself to rest. Samuel sat nearby, keeping watch. The stars began to appear in the night sky, shining brightly over the desert. Naeli, staring at them, felt a small sense of peace. For the first time in days, she felt that perhaps she would survive. The desert had not defeated her yet, and thanks to Samuel, there was a chance she might live to see her people again. Though they did not yet understand each other completely, a silent bond had begun to form. It was a bond born out of survival, trust, and the recognition of shared humanity in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. The night stretched on, and Naeli, weak but alive, drifted into a restless sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time, she would face them with hope. The desert was still vast and merciless, but at that moment, the small ranch became a safe haven, a place where life could continue against all odds. And as the first cool breeze of the night touched her sunburned skin, Naeli realized that even in the harshest places, kindness could still be found. Naeli woke the next morning to the soft light of dawn spilling through the wooden windows of the ranch house. Her body ached, but she was still alive, and that realization brought a deep, quiet relief. The harsh sun of the previous day had left her exhausted and weak, but the cool morning air, along with the water and food Samuel had given her, had begun to restore some of her strength. She moved slowly, every muscle stiff, as she tried to get up from the small cot where she had slept. Samuel was already awake, tending to the morning chores. The ranch was alive with sounds, the low murmur of cattle in the pens, the clatter of wooden buckets, and the soft rustle of wind through the sparse desert plants. He noticed Naeli stirring and came to check on her. She looked at him cautiously, unsure whether she could trust this stranger completely, but there was no malice in his eyes, only concern. "Drink some water," Samuel said gently, holding out a cup. His voice was calm, patient, and filled with a warmth that made her feel slightly less afraid. Naeli took it with trembling hands, grateful for the life-giving liquid. She had been without water for far too long, and each sip seemed to give her more energy. Samuel watched her carefully, noting the pale look of her skin and the lingering bruises. The morning passed slowly, filled with quiet gestures rather than words. Naeli could not yet speak English well, and Samuel knew very little of the Apache language, but communication was possible in other ways, through looks, gestures, and small actions. He brought her bread and some dried meat, placing them carefully on a plate for her. She ate slowly, savoring each bite. It was the first food she had had in days, and it seemed to give her body a new sense of purpose. As the sun climbed higher, Samuel took her outside to the shade of the barn. He wanted her to feel the desert in a safer space, to see that she was not completely trapped and alone. The air was hot, but the shadow of the building provided some relief. Naeli took a few tentative steps, her legs still weak, but each movement brought a small sense of independence. She looked at the wide open land and felt a mix of fear and wonder. The desert could kill, but it was also strangely beautiful, with its jagged rocks, golden sands, and distant mountains glowing in the morning light. Samuel began to speak softly to her, repeating simple words and pointing at objects: water, food, house. Naeli listened intently, nodding when she understood. Slowly, they began to form a small bridge of understanding. Though the language barrier was real, the desire to survive and to help one another was stronger. Each day she learned a few more words, and Samuel in turn watched her gestures and expressions, learning how to understand her needs. But as Naeli grew stronger, so did the reality of her situation. Samuel's ranch was remote, and visitors were rare. The nearest town was miles away, and the desert around them was unforgiving. He knew that helping her could bring risks, not only from local settlers who might view an Apache woman as a threat, but also from Apache scouts who could be searching for her. Tension hung in the air, unspoken but very real. Samuel wrestled with his conscience. He had saved her life, but the world outside the safety of his ranch was harsh and unforgiving. For her part, Naeli was aware of these dangers too. But, though she felt grateful to Samuel, she knew that not everyone would accept her presence. She had grown up hearing stories of settlers who were hostile to her people. The thought made her cautious, but she could not deny the kindness Samuel had shown. His actions spoke louder than words. She remembered the desperate state she had been in the day before, dehydrated, injured, and alone, and she knew that without him she might not have survived. Days passed, and Naeli's strength returned gradually. Samuel continued to care for her, giving her water, food, and medical attention for her wounds. He even helped her wash the dirt and sand from her hair and skin, actions that seemed small but meant a great deal. For Naeli, this was more than just physical care. It was a sign of respect and humanity. She began to trust Samuel more each day, though the shadows of fear and uncertainty never fully left her. As Naeli regained her energy, she started helping with small tasks around the ranch. She fed the chickens, carried buckets of water, and learned to gather eggs. Samuel watched her carefully, amazed by her determination. Despite the hardships she had endured, she was resilient, and her spirit seemed unbroken. For Naeli, working alongside Samuel gave her a sense of purpose. It was not the life she had known before, but it was a life where she could survive, at least for now. However, not everyone in the area viewed Naeli's presence positively. Rumors began to circulate among the neighboring settlers that Samuel had taken in an Apache woman. Some were suspicious, questioning why he would help someone from a group they had long considered an enemy. Samuel ignored the gossip, focused instead on caring for Naeli. But he could not ignore the tension entirely. He knew that the desert was full of danger, not only from the harsh environment, but also from the prejudices of those around him. One afternoon, as Samuel and Naeli worked near the cattle pens, a group of settlers rode past on horseback. They slowed when they saw Naeli, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. Samuel stepped forward, placing himself between her and the men. Though he did not speak harshly, his presence was firm, a silent message that Naeli was under his protection. The settlers exchanged uneasy glances but rode on, muttering among themselves. The incident left a mark on both Samuel and Naeli. It was a reminder that their safety was fragile, and that kindness alone could not shield them from the harsh judgments of others. Despite the challenges, a quiet bond began to grow between the two. Naeli shared stories of her childhood, gestures and drawings helping Samuel understand the life she had known. She spoke of the mountains and rivers near her village, of the songs sung around evening fires, and of the traditions passed down through generations. Samuel listened, fascinated by the glimpse into a world so different from his own. He realized that, despite the cultural differences, there was a shared humanity in their experiences, the desire to survive, to care for loved ones, and to find safety in a dangerous world. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned brilliant shades of orange and pink, Naeli and Samuel sat outside the ranch house. The desert stretched endlessly around them, quiet except for the low murmur of the wind. Naeli looked at Samuel, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. She did not know what the future held, whether she would ever return to her people or whether the desert would claim her again. But in that moment, she felt safe, and that feeling was precious. Samuel, too, felt a deep sense of responsibility. He had saved her life, but he also knew that helping her was not a simple act. It required courage, patience, and a willingness to face the judgment of others. Yet, as he watched her begin to smile again, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes, he knew that he had made the right choice. The desert was harsh, but compassion could create a sanctuary even in the most unlikely places. As night fell and the stars appeared, shining brightly in the clear desert sky, Naeli settled into her cot with a sense of cautious hope. She had survived another day, and though the challenges ahead were uncertain, she was no longer alone. Samuel's quiet strength and kindness had given her a chance to heal, and she clung to that hope with all her heart. The desert, with all its dangers, had not defeated her, and she was beginning to understand that survival was not only about physical strength, but also about trust, courage, and the bonds formed in moments of need. The next few days would bring new challenges, but for now, there was a fragile peace. Naeli was recovering, Samuel was determined to protect her, and together they began to navigate the delicate balance of survival, trust, and understanding in a world that often seemed unwelcoming. Each day was a test of endurance and humanity, and each day their connection grew stronger. In the heart of the desert, two lives from very different worlds had collided, and in that collision, a story of courage, hope, and the power of kindness was beginning to unfold. Days turned into a week, and Naeli's strength returned steadily under Samuel's careful care. Each morning she rose with the sun, her body no longer trembling with weakness, and each evening she sat by the ranch house, watching the desert glow as the sun sank behind distant mountains. Samuel admired her resilience. The desert had tested her to its limits, but she had endured. And yet, despite the small peace they had found, both of them knew that danger could arrive at any moment. Samuel had grown fond of Naeli in the short time they had spent together. Her courage, quiet determination, and gentle spirit had impressed him deeply. He had not expected to feel such care for someone he barely knew, yet there was something unspoken between them, a shared understanding born of hardship. He noticed how she would quietly watch the animals, helping them with care, or how she would pause in the yard to look at the sky, lost in thought. She reminded him that life, even in the harshest conditions, had moments of beauty worth noticing. But the quiet days also brought challenges. The ranch, though remote, was not entirely isolated. Samuel was aware of the risk that others, settlers, travelers, or even Apache scouts, could approach at any time. The story of an Apache woman being cared for by a rancher might spread, and reactions could range from suspicion to anger. Samuel knew that some neighbors might not understand why he had helped Nayeli, and he feared confrontation. More than once he had caught worried looks from passing travelers or distant ranchers who muttered under their breath. Nayeli, too, began to sense the tension in subtle ways. Though she felt safe with Samuel, she could see the cautious glances of the ranch hands and hear snippets of conversation from outside the fences. She understood that her presence here could create conflict, but she could not imagine going back into the desert alone. The thought of facing dehydration, predators, or hostile strangers again filled her with dread. The ranch was not just a shelter, it was her chance at survival. One afternoon, Samuel decided it was time to teach Nayeli more about the ranch. He wanted her to understand the land, to be able to help herself and the animals if necessary. Together they checked the fences, fed the cattle, and inspected the water troughs. Samuel spoke slowly, repeating words and using gestures to help her understand. Nayeli listened carefully, following his instructions. She began to pick up simple routines, carrying water buckets to the animals and repairing small breaks in the fence with his guidance. Though the work was hard, it gave her a sense of accomplishment. As they worked side by side, Samuel and Nayeli began to communicate more effectively. She had learned enough English to understand simple sentences, and he had begun to recognize her gestures and expressions. Words were no longer the only bridge between them. Shared effort and trust had formed a bond stronger than language. There was a quiet rhythm to their days, a rhythm of work, care, and cautious conversation that made the harsh desert feel less lonely. Despite the peace, a cloud of uncertainty lingered. One day, as Samuel was tending the cattle near the edge of the property, he noticed fresh tracks in the sand. They were human footprints, small but distinct, moving toward the ranch. His heart quickened. He recognized the signs immediately. These were not random travelers, but people who might be searching for Nayeli. He hurried back to the house to alert her, feeling a mix of concern and resolve. Nayeli, though startled, did not panic. She had survived the desert and its many dangers. She could face this challenge too. Samuel prepared quietly, moving items around the ranch to ensure her safety, and planning how to confront whoever was approaching. They could not hide completely. The desert was wide and open, but they could control their response. Samuel spoke gently to her, explaining that they might need to remain calm and show no fear. Nayeli nodded, trusting his judgment. The footsteps grew louder, and soon a small group appeared at the edge of the property. Samuel stepped forward to meet them, shielding Nayeli from view. To his surprise, the group was not hostile. They were Apache scouts, sent by Nayeli's people to find her after she had disappeared. Their leader, a tall man with a serious expression, stepped forward and spoke in a language Nayeli understood well. She stepped out from behind Samuel cautiously, her eyes meeting theirs. The encounter was tense. The scouts were wary of Samuel, unsure why a settler would harbor one of their own. Samuel in turn explained calmly that he had found Nayeli in the desert, injured and weak, and had cared for her until she regained strength. The scouts exchanged looks, assessing his honesty. Nayeli, though still recovering, spoke up, explaining with gestures and simple words that Samuel had saved her life. Slowly, the tension began to ease. The Apache scouts had come with the intention of bringing Nayeli home, but they were also aware of the dangers she had faced alone. They listened as she described her journey, the desert's cruelty, and Samuel's kindness. The scouts nodded solemnly, acknowledging the truth of her words. It was a delicate moment, two very different worlds, connected by a single human story, meeting in understanding rather than conflict. Even as the immediate danger passed, Samuel knew that the future would not be simple. Nayeli could not remain at the ranch indefinitely, and yet sending her back too soon could put her at risk. He had grown attached, and he also understood that her trust in him had been built on his protection. He felt a deep responsibility for her, more than he had ever imagined possible. Nayeli, too, felt conflicted. She longed to see her people again, to return to the community that had shaped her life, but she was hesitant to leave the safety she had found with Samuel. Over the next few days, they prepared for what might come. Samuel taught Nayeli more about survival, showing her how to read the desert landscape, how to find hidden water sources, and how to tend to animals efficiently. Nayeli absorbed every lesson, her mind sharp and alert. She practiced quietly, determined to be strong for herself and for Samuel, who had risked so much to save her. The ranch became a place of learning, of mutual respect, and of quiet companionship. During this time, Samuel also faced an internal struggle. He knew that caring for Nayeli could draw criticism, suspicion, and even danger from his neighbors. But he could not bring himself to regret helping her. Every time he saw her laugh softly while feeding a calf, or the way her eyes brightened when she understood a new word, he was reminded that kindness was never wasted. He realized that courage was not only about facing the desert, but also about standing up for what was right, even when the world might judge him harshly. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day. They shared quiet moments, sitting on the porch of the ranch house as the sun set, talking in a mix of words, gestures, and smiles. Nayeli began to trust Samuel completely, and he, in turn, came to see her as more than a person he had saved. She was a companion, a student of the desert, and a symbol of resilience. Their connection transcended words. It was built on mutual respect, survival, and the human capacity for empathy. But the reality of life in the desert remained. One evening, as they sat watching the stars, Nayeli spoke softly, pointing toward the distant mountains. She gestured that she wanted to return to her people eventually, and Samuel understood immediately. He nodded, though a pang of sadness went through him. He had grown attached, but he knew that survival and trust meant respecting her wishes. She could not stay at the ranch forever, and he could not ask her to. The following morning, Samuel and Nayeli began preparing for the journey she would eventually take. They mapped out the safest path, gathered supplies, and practiced the skills she would need to survive once more in the wild. Each step was careful, deliberate, and thoughtful. They both understood that the desert could be unforgiving, and that every precaution mattered. In the weeks that followed, Samuel watched as Nayeli became stronger, more confident, and fully capable of facing the desert again. Then the moment of separation was approaching, and though neither spoke much of it, both felt its weight. Samuel knew that letting her go would be difficult, but he also understood that trust and compassion sometimes meant making sacrifices. Nayeli, too, felt a mixture of gratitude, fear, and excitement. The desert had once been her enemy, but now it was a place she understood. A place where survival and courage had been forged in partnership with another human being. And so, The stage was set for the next chapter of their lives. The desert had tested them both, shaping their bond and teaching them lessons about trust, courage, and humanity. Though the journey ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. The choices they had made and the trust they had built would guide them through the challenges to come. The major turning point in their story was approaching, and both Nayeli and Samuel were ready to face it, together in spirit if not in proximity. The day had begun like any other in the desert. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the ranch. Samuel moved about his chores with quiet focus, but an unease lingered in the air. There was a tension that neither he nor Nayeli could ignore. The Apache scouts had left, but their presence had reminded them both that their time together was fragile. The outside world could intrude at any moment, and neither of them was naive enough to think otherwise. Nayeli was awake early, sitting on the edge of the porch, her hands folded in her lap. She watched the desert stretch endlessly before her, her thoughts far away. Though she had grown stronger, her mind could not rest. She thought of her family, her tribe, and the life she had left behind. She thought of the mountains and rivers, the songs of the elders, and the warm fires where she had once felt safe. The memory of her people filled her with longing, but she also remembered Samuel, his calm voice, the careful way he had treated her wounds, and the small kindnesses he had shown every day. It was a strange and powerful bond they shared, forged in the crucible of survival. The desert had tested them both, pushing them to their limits, and yet here they were, alive, stronger, and connected in ways neither had expected. Samuel knew that their time together was temporary, but he also understood that the choices he had made mattered deeply. He had saved her life, and in doing so, he had changed the course of both of their stories. The tension of the day increased when a distant rider appeared on the horizon. Samuel squinted against the harsh sunlight, recognizing the familiar figure of one of the Apache scouts who had visited earlier. He spurred his horse forward, moving cautiously toward the approaching rider. Nayeli watched from the porch, her heart pounding. She could feel the change in the air, the sudden shift that signaled that something important was about to happen. As the scout arrived, Samuel dismounted and met him near the fence. They spoke in low tones, gestures, and brief words. Nayeli could not understand all of it, but she sensed the gravity of the conversation. "Ah." The scout pointed toward the east, where the mountains rose like silent sentinels, and gestured that her tribe was near. Samuel nodded, a tight line of determination on his face. He returned to the ranch house to speak with Nayeli, his voice calm but firm. "They're coming," he said. "Your people are not far, and they want to bring you back." Nayeli's heart leaped at the words, relief mixed with fear. She wanted to see her tribe again, but the thought of leaving the safety she had known with Samuel was daunting. She looked at him, her eyes wide, searching for guidance. Samuel smiled gently, though it did not reach his eyes entirely. He understood the complexity of the moment. "You must go to them," he said softly. "It is your people. You belong with them. But I will help you get there safely." Nayeli nodded, a mixture of gratitude and apprehension in her gaze. She had come to trust Samuel completely, and she knew that he would do everything in his power to protect her. Yet the reality of leaving was terrifying. The desert could be dangerous, and there was no guarantee that she would reach her tribe without help. Plans were quickly made. Samuel prepared supplies, water, dried meat, and blankets, while Nayeli packed the few belongings she had with her. The ranch became a place of quiet urgency. The rhythm of their lives suddenly focused on the task ahead. Samuel spoke to her in simple words, repeating instructions and demonstrating what to do if danger arose. Nayeli listened attentively, committing every detail to memory. She had survived the desert before, but this journey would be different. It would involve careful navigation, trust, and courage. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the first signs of her people appeared in the distance. Apache warriors, mounted and alert, moved swiftly across the desert landscape. Their presence was both comforting and intimidating. Nayeli's heart raced, and she could feel the tension in the air. Samuel stood beside her, calm and resolute, prepared to face whatever might come. He knew that this moment would test both their courage and their trust. The warriors approached cautiously, their eyes fixed on Nayeli. Samuel stepped forward, placing himself between her and the strangers, a protective barrier of calm strength. The leader of the group, a tall man with stern features, spoke first. He questioned Samuel in a mixture of words and gestures, trying to understand why he had brought Nayeli here. Samuel explained carefully, recounting the story of her rescue, her injuries, and the care he had provided. The Apache leader listened, studying him intently. Nayeli, sensing the tension, spoke up in her language, explaining that Samuel had saved her life. Her voice was soft but firm, carrying the weight of truth and gratitude. The warriors exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from suspicion to cautious understanding. It was a delicate moment, a clash of cultures, expectations, and survival instincts, balanced on the edge of trust. Despite the growing understanding, there was still a challenge to overcome. The warriors had questions about her safety and her well-being, and Samuel knew that he could not simply hand her over without ensuring that she would not be harmed. He spoke honestly, describing the care he had provided and his concern for her future. Nayeli, standing beside him, nodded in agreement. Together they conveyed the story of trust, resilience, and compassion. The standoff was tense. Both sides understood the risks. The desert was harsh, the journey ahead uncertain, and misunderstandings could lead to conflict. Yet in that tension, a new understanding began to emerge. Samuel's steadfast commitment to her safety, combined with Nayeli's own courage, created a bridge between the two worlds. The Apache warriors recognized that her life had been preserved, not out of weakness, but out of respect for humanity itself. Slowly, the atmosphere began to change. The warriors relaxed, their movements less rigid, their expressions softer. Nayeli stepped forward, her voice carrying a quiet confidence that spoke louder than any words Samuel could offer. She expressed her desire to return to her people, while also acknowledging the kindness and protection Samuel had shown her. It was a powerful moment, one where courage, trust, and humanity overcame fear and suspicion. Samuel watched as Nayeli was embraced by her people. Relief and pride filled him, mixed with a bittersweet sense of loss. He had grown attached to her, shared in her struggles, and helped shape her survival. Letting her go was difficult, yet he understood that it was the right choice. The desert had tested them both, and now it was time for her to return to the life she had been separated from. As the sun began to set, casting the desert in deep oranges and purples, Samuel and Nayeli exchanged a final glance. No words were needed. The bond they had formed spoke volumes. Nayeli would carry the memory of his kindness, his guidance, and the safe haven he had provided. Samuel would remember her courage, resilience, and the lessons of trust and compassion she had inspired. In that moment, the harsh desert seemed almost gentle, a witness to the human capacity for empathy and courage. The Apache warriors prepared to lead Nayeli back to her tribe. Samuel assisted in securing the supplies, offering final instructions, and ensuring that she was ready for the journey. Nayeli adjusted her pack, took a deep breath, and looked back one last time at the ranch that had become a sanctuary. Samuel nodded, a silent promise that she would always have a place in his memory and his respect. As they began to ride away, Nayeli felt a surge of mixed emotions, relief, excitement, and apprehension, intertwined with gratitude and sadness. She had survived the desert, experienced the kindness of a stranger, and found strength she had never known she possessed. Samuel watched her leave, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. He had acted out of compassion, and in doing so, he had changed 2 lives forever. The journey ahead for Nayeli was uncertain. The desert could be dangerous, and there were many challenges she would have to face before reaching her tribe. But now, she was stronger, wiser, and more prepared. She carried the lessons Samuel had taught her, the kindness he had shown, and the courage she had discovered within herself. Together, those experiences would guide her through the trials ahead. For Samuel, life at the ranch continued, but it was forever altered. He had witnessed firsthand the resilience of the human spirit, the power of trust, and the importance of compassion in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. The memory of Nayeli and the story of their shared struggle would remain with him always, a reminder that even in the most challenging circumstances, courage and kindness could prevail. That night, the desert was quiet. The stars shone brilliantly overhead, reflecting the vastness of the world and the small but profound impact of individual acts of humanity. Nayeli's journey back to her people had begun, and Samuel returned to his work with a sense of calm, knowing that he had done the right thing. In the heart of the desert, 2 lives had intersected, and from that intersection had emerged a story of courage, trust, and the unbreakable bond formed in the most unlikely of places. The desert was quiet that morning, the wind barely stirring the golden sands. Nayeli rode with her people, moving steadily toward the mountains where her tribe awaited. Each mile brought a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Her heart swelled with anticipation to see her family and the elders who had cared for her since childhood. Yet a quiet ache lingered in her chest, a sense of loss for the safety, kindness, and quiet strength she had found at the ranch with Samuel. The journey was not easy. Though she had grown stronger and learned much from Samuel, the desert was still unforgiving. The sun beat down relentlessly during the day, and the nights were bitterly cold. There were stretches with no water except what they carried, and the rocky terrain forced her to stay alert at all times. She remembered Samuel's lessons, how to read the signs of the desert, how to move quietly, how to protect herself from danger. Those lessons were invaluable, and she found herself relying on them constantly. As they traveled, Nayeli thought often of Samuel. She remembered the first day he had found her, collapsed and dehydrated, the way he had carried her to safety, and the patience he had shown while helping her heal. Every small kindness, offering water, speaking gently, teaching her how to care for herself, felt monumental now. She realized that his actions had not only saved her life, but had given her confidence she had never known. His kindness had been a gift she would carry forever. Her mind also reflected on the bond they had shared during those days at the ranch. There had been no words for the depth of understanding between them, no grand gestures, only quiet moments of trust, care, and respect. She recalled the afternoons tending to the animals, the evenings sitting on the porch as the sun set, and the nights under the stars when Samuel had taught her to see the desert not only as a place of danger, but also as a place of beauty. Each memory brought warmth to her heart, even amid the desert's harshness. The tribe was still a day's journey away, and Nayeli could see the mountains growing closer with each passing hour. The sight filled her with hope and apprehension. She had been alone in the world for so long that the thought of returning to the familiarity of her people was both comforting and strange. She wondered how they would react to her rescue story, how they would respond to Samuel's role in her survival, and whether they would understand the deep bond that had formed between her and the rancher. When they finally reached the outskirts of her village, Naeli's heart pounded. She could see the familiar shapes of her people, their clothing, and the familiar sounds of voices carried on the wind. The elders approached, their faces lined with worry and relief. They had feared the worst, assuming she might not have survived the harsh desert. Naeli's eyes welled with tears as she saw them, and she ran to embrace her family. The warmth of their touch, the familiar sense of her home, and the sight of her people safe filled her with a profound sense of belonging. Yet, amidst the joy, Naeli felt a quiet longing for the ranch and Samuel. She told her story carefully, recounting how she had wandered alone in the desert, how her strength had faltered, and how a stranger had found her, cared for her, and protected her. The elders listened intently, their expressions shifting from disbelief to gratitude. Samuel's name was spoken with respect, and the tribe acknowledged his courage and compassion. Naeli's tale became a story of survival and trust, one that would be remembered for years to come. As the days passed, Naeli slowly reintegrated into her tribe. She participated in the daily routines, helping with chores, gathering water, and tending to the younger children. She shared the knowledge she had gained from Samuel, how to read the desert for hidden water sources, how to care for small injuries, and how to remain calm under pressure. Her people were amazed by her resilience and the skills she had developed during her time at the ranch. Naeli realized that she had grown in ways she had never imagined, and that growth was a gift from her experiences with Samuel. Even as life returned to its familiar rhythms, Naeli never forgot the lessons of trust, courage, and compassion. Samuel had shown her that kindness could transcend fear, that empathy could bridge worlds divided by history, and that courage was not only in facing the desert, but also in helping others without expectation. She shared these lessons with her tribe, teaching the younger generation about the power of humanity in the face of hardship. Back at the ranch, Samuel continued his work, tending to the land and the animals, but he often thought of Naeli. He remembered her courage, her curiosity, and the way she had embraced life despite every obstacle. Though he missed her presence, he felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that she was safe and thriving among her people. His actions, driven by compassion and responsibility, had created a ripple of goodness that would last far beyond the desert. Samuel's neighbors and other settlers soon heard of Naeli's safe return. Some expressed surprise that a rancher would care for someone from a group they considered outsiders. Others admired his courage and empathy. Slowly the story spread, a tale not of conflict or fear, but of understanding, bravery, and the human capacity for kindness. Samuel realized that his choice had not only saved a life, but it also set an example for others, showing that humanity could rise above prejudice and suspicion. In the months that followed, Naeli grew stronger both in body and spirit. She had returned to her tribe, but the desert had left its mark on her. She carried with her the lessons of survival, the skills of self-reliance, and the memory of a stranger who had shown her extraordinary compassion. She would remember Samuel always, not just as the man who saved her, but as a symbol of hope and humanity in a harsh world. The bond they had formed was rare and profound. Though separated by distance and circumstance, the lessons of trust, courage, and empathy continued to guide both of them. Naeli's life had been changed forever, not only because she survived the desert, but because she had encountered a kindness so genuine that it transformed her understanding of the world. Samuel, too, had been changed. His act of compassion had reinforced his belief in humanity and the importance of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. Years later, Nayeli would recount the story to her children and grandchildren. She would speak of the desert, of the dangers she had faced, and of the strength she had discovered within herself. But she would also speak of Samuel, the rancher who had saved her life, who had cared for her without expectation, and who had shown that courage and kindness could coexist. His story would live on in hers, a testament to the power of empathy and trust. Samuel, now older and still tending his ranch, would sometimes look across the desert, imagining Nayeli among her people. He knew that the choices he had made a difference, not just in her life, but in the lives of many who would hear her story. He had acted out of simple humanity, and yet the impact of that action had rippled far beyond his imagination. The desert, once a place of isolation and danger, had become a place of connection, courage, and hope. For Nayeli, life continued with a sense of purpose and resilience. She had survived the desert, returned to her people, and carried the lessons of trust and compassion into her daily life. She taught her children how to respect the land, how to care for each other, and how to face adversity with courage. Samuel's kindness remained a guiding memory, a reminder that even in the harshest circumstances, humans were capable of extraordinary goodness. The story of Nayeli and Samuel became a quiet legend in the region, a story of survival, courage, and the unexpected bond between two people from very different worlds. It was a story that reminded everyone that the greatest strength often comes not from weapons or power, but from empathy, trust, and the willingness to act with compassion when it matters most. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple, Nayeli looked toward the horizon, feeling the warmth of the light on her face. She felt the weight of her journey, the trials she had endured, and the kindness that had saved her life. She was alive, stronger, and filled with hope for the future. And though Samuel was far away, she carried his lessons and his courage with her, a guiding presence in the story of her life. In the end, the desert had not defeated her. Instead, it had revealed her resilience, strengthened her spirit, and introduced her to the extraordinary kindness of another human being. Samuel had done the unthinkable, not for recognition, reward, or gain, but simply because it was the right thing to do. And that act of courage and compassion had changed the course of their lives forever, leaving behind a story that would inspire generations to come. The desert, once a place of fear and danger, had become a witness to a tale of hope, trust, and the enduring power of human kindness. Nayeli's journey had come full circle, from isolation and despair to reunion and growth. And Samuel, in his quiet, steadfast way, had left an indelible mark, not only on her life, but on the larger story of humanity's capacity for empathy and courage.